But first, I've always wanted Australia Day to stay on January 26. But you know, I get it, a lot of people say it's too divisive. So after today especially, I say, okay, move it. Move Australia Day to October 14. That's the day we vote on the voice, because that voice will be smashed to pieces. And October 14 will go down in history as the day Australia said no to racism and yes to a new future of dealing with each other as equals. You see, today actually gave us a moment of hope. It's like a turning point in this debate, because never has the choice before us with this Aboriginal-only voice, the Parliament, been so clear. It's now a choice represented by these two women. On the left, Professor Marcia Langton, the woman who co-designed the voice, and on the right, Senator Jacinta Price, the Coalition spokesman on Indigenous Australians. Both women in the past week have given speeches to the National Press Club in Canberra. Langton last week in the main function room, but Price today squeezed into a ramshackle corner of some other room because of renovations, we were told. Yet despite that disrespect, Price gave a speech in front of her parents that could mark a critical turning point in race relations in this country and give us some clarity about the choice before us. Now you compare. There's Marcia Langton. She represents the old race politics of the left, division, resentments, looking for racists everywhere.
The surge of racist nonsense is confined to a minority of Australians. Ordinary Australians are thinking, yes, of course I'm voting for the voice, and that would be, you know, say 48, 49%. Then there's the hard no voters, and I'm hoping that they're about 20%, and they're the ones who are spewing the racism.
But then there's Jacinta Price, who today gave a speech so radically different from Langton's and Labor's vision of Aborigines with their own advisory parliament, followed by a treaty, negotiations over sovereignty, years to come of racial contests and no doubt abuse, plus a kind of apartheid. Now, this was best summed up after Price's speech when white male journalists of the left tried to insist that Price, this Aboriginal and Celtic woman, admit that Aborigines like her really were victims, really should be blaming whites, and her response, I think, will ring down the ages.
Do you believe the history of colonisation continues to have an impact on some Indigenous Australians?
No. I'll be honest with you, no, I don't think so. A positive impact, absolutely. I mean, now we've got running water, we've got readily available food. I mean, everything that my grandfather had when he was growing up, because he first saw whitefellas in his early adolescence, we now have. Otherwise, he would have had to live off the land, provide for his family, and all of those measures, which Aboriginal Australians, many of us, have the same opportunities as all other Australians in this country. And we certainly have probably one of the greatest systems around the world in terms of the democratic structure in comparison to other countries. It is why migrants flock to Australia to call Australia home, because the opportunity that exists for all Australians. But if we keep telling Aboriginal people that they are victims, well, we are effectively removing their agency and then giving them the expectation that someone else is responsible for their lives. That is the worst possible thing you can do to any human being, is tell them that they are a victim without agency. And that's what I refuse to do.
Would you accept that there have been generations of trauma as a result of that history?
Well, I guess that would mean that those of us whose ancestors were dispossessed of their own country and brought here in chains as convicts are also suffering from intergenerational trauma. So I should be doubly suffering from intergenerational trauma.
Great stuff. You can understand perhaps why I'm playing you big slabs of this, because this is important. Jacinta Price is demanding actually a new era. Well, I thought it was the old one, but there you go, where we judge each other as individuals and not as members of some race or tribe. Now, every Australian really should read or see this speech. In fact, I'm going to make Price speak a bit more for herself. The voice, she said, is not the answer to Aboriginal disadvantage.
The Voice is flawed in its foundations. It is built on lies and an aggressive attempt to fracture our nation's founding document and divide the country built upon it. That division has now seen the No campaign branded as being base racism and sheer stupidity, when in fact, what would be racist is segmenting our nation into us and them. And you have to say, it would also be stupidity to divide a nation when it has been growing ever more cohesive. To split it along fractures of race rather than try to bring it closer together.
Now, Price, of course, countered the lies of the Yes campaign. You know, it's false to say Aborigines don't already have a voice. Look, for instance, she said, at the 11 people in federal parliament who identify as Aboriginal. And no, it's false to say this voice would just give advice. In fact, the word advice, she said, is nowhere in the words we'll actually be voting on. She's right. And no one knows what powers the judges will give it to make politicians listen to the voice's demands for, say, you know, compensation, a treaty. But I want to end with the one long final quote from this stunning speech that I think will change a lot of things. Price nailed this lie that we need this voice if we want to change. We can't have more of the same. But seriously, a change? We're going to get change from a voice that will be stacked by activists who are selected, not elected, by the Aboriginal aristocracy? Seriously? That's not change. But this is change.
What has become abundantly clear is that when racial separatism that designates a class of Australians as an other is prioritised over serving Australians on the basis of need, we experience failure. An industry has been established that provides opportunity for the already privileged to occupy positions that are supposed to deliver outcomes for our marginalised, based purely on the fact they share a racial heritage. Such positions should carry immense responsibility. But unfortunately, very little has come in the way of accountability. It is for this very reason that I, along with my colleague, Senator Karen Little, have put motions before the Senate to establish an inquiry into structures that currently exist to deliver the much-needed outcomes to our marginalised communities. If the taxpayer is funding these structures, like land councils, native title, and similar organisations, but they are not delivering outcomes, then it is incumbent upon us as elected members of Parliament to provide a platform for the marginalised, to hear from them as to how they are being failed. So when the Prime Minister says the voice is the last chance we have to overcome the disparity of marginalised Aboriginal Australians, do not believe him. Do not believe him when he attempts to undermine the importance of the Aboriginal members of Parliament who are fighting to effect real change via the democratic structures by which we have been elected.
So, you now see the choice put starkly by two women of Aboriginal background, Marcia Langton of the race industry and Jacinta Price, who says reject division by race. Now it's time for you to choose on October 14 and make that really our real Australia Day, our future together and never apart.